They say that good things come to those who wait, and boy have we waited for this one. The Hero Xpulse was first shown as a concept in end 2017, and it's been over 1.5 years before we've got our hands on the production motorcycle. But you see, the wait goes on much beyond that, because this motorcycle is a spiritual successor to the Hero Impulse, a bike that came out all the way back in 2011. So we have established that we have waited. Now it's time to answer the question that's on all your minds. Is this a good thing? The original Impulse was more than just India's first off-road motorcycle, and was also the first bike to be sold under the new Hero MotoCorp banner. Nevertheless, the Impulse was heavily based on the Brazil spec Honda NXR 150, and it also ran the same 150cc engine you'd find in the likes of the Honda Unicorn or the Hero CBZ Extreme. This time around though, things are very different, and the Xpulse is a completely in-house engineering effort down to the frame and the powertrain. In fact, this time around, the Xpulse comes in two flavors, the off-road biased Xpulse and the more road-focused Xpulse T. With that in mind, the Hero Ride event was spread over 2 days, with the first day dedicated to the off-road motorcycle. Since this is a brand new motorcycle, we should probably start with the way it looks. And it's quite obvious that Hero's taken a simple, clean and rather straightforward approach to the design. In fact, the Xpulse isn't a very exciting thing to look at, although the front end does remind of the Honda CB300R with its round full LED headlamp. The new fuel tank holds 13 litres and it's quite a bit longer than the one on the Impulse. The seat isn't as flat as you'd find on a proper enduro bike either, and that's because Hero had to ensure that the seat height was reasonably accessible, which they've managed to do quite well. The rear section, however, looks quite plain and almost commuter-like in the design of its quarter panels, and it would have been nice to see something more unique here. On the upside, the Xpulse family debuts a new LCD instrument cluster which features Bluetooth connectivity and supports simple turn-by-turn navigation. The display is easy to read and it has all the information you need. Both Xpulse models get this display as well as an under-seat USB charger, but only the off-road version gets the small windscreen. Hero's deep involvement in rally raid motorsport shows in the Xpulse's tyre sizes. With a 21-inch front and an 18-inch rear, this is the exact same size that you'll find in the Dakar rally bikes. Now what these big rims bring is stability, and off-road, stability means confidence. Another big upside though is that with these sizes, you have access to a whole world of aftermarket tyre options. A few minutes into riding at the trails in the huge Big Rock Motor Park outside Bengaluru, it becomes clear that this is a very friendly and encouraging machine. I'm particularly sold on the suspension setup. It's not too soft, but it has vast amounts of travel and it soaks in bumps really well. In fact, I never managed to bottom it out at all, but then again, I probably wasn't riding hard enough. I'll happily admit that I have a lot to learn about off-road riding, and the Xpulse seems completely understanding of that. Part of this friendly nature comes from its brand new frame, which looks similar to the single down tube unit on the Extreme, but it is in fact a brand new frame. The swing arm is also new and it uses high tensile steel in its construction. Even the rear shock is a brand new unit and it's adjustable for preload by 10 steps, unlike the 7-step unit you'll find on the Extreme 200R and the Xpulse 200T. Now it's been a long time since I rode the old Impulse, but I can say with confidence that the Xpulse has much better suspension control. What's also different is that the Xpulse is heavier than the Impulse by nearly 20 kilos, but I found the bike very easy to manage, and it's worth bearing in mind that this motorcycle is still nearly 40 kilos lighter than the Royal Enfield Himalayan. The Xpulse feels slim and its riding position is spacious, upright and super comfortable, even though the foot pegs are now higher than before. Now these higher set pegs are a blessing off-road, but I found myself wishing that they were set a bit further to the back to help grip the bike more effectively while standing up. Front and rear brake sizes are identical on both Xpulses, but the off-road bike gets pedal discs at both ends. Single channel ABS is standard and it doesn't get in the way too much on loose surfaces, while the rear brake is easy to modulate. The Seat Grips tyres continue to impress as they've done on the Himalayan, with a good balance between off-road confidence and on-road grip. Now it goes without saying that this is not a hardcore off-roader, and I found myself enjoying the slow and technical trails more than the motocross track at Big Rock. Nevertheless, all these ingredients come together to make for a bike that feels so confident and encouraging that you quickly start looking to up the pace. And that's where the Xpulse feels a bit lacking.
It uses the very same 2-valve air-cooled 200cc motor that debuted in the Xtreme 200R a few months ago. This one though gets fuel injection, and while that adds a bit of smoothness on top, this engine still makes the exact same power and torque figures as earlier.
As we've seen with the Xtreme, this level of performance feels more on par with quick 160cc motorcycles in the faster 200s. In the dirt, it's enough to spin up the rear end first, but above that it's not so easy to steer the bike with a throttle. The story is similar out on the highway as well, where a cruising speed of about 85 to 90 km per hour is sustainable, but anything above 100 feels like work. For sharper response, the Xpulse runs a larger rear sprocket up by one tooth over the Xtreme 200 and the Xpulse T. We found that the bike hits an indicated top speed of about 125 kph with the assistance of a full crouch and a long stretch of downhill tarmac. Effortless high-speed performance then is not a strong point, and we discovered that the seats on both bikes are uncomfortably firm over long periods as well, especially on the 200T. Now this is something that Hero says they're aware of, and they tell us that these are not the final production seats, so we'll have to see how that goes. Overall, performance levels are just about adequate, but I'm not sure how effortless things will be when you go looking for some high altitude adventures with about 20 kilos of luggage strapped on the back.
It certainly isn't excitingly quick, but I'll tell you what, the Xpulse feels bulletproof on whatever roads you can throw at it, and when you actually get to a set of trails, there's a lot of fun to be had. Now it's been a long day and the heat has been relentless, but I've had a good time on this bike, and I'm keen to see what the Xpulse T has in store for us tomorrow, because that bike has quite a different identity to this one.
We hopped onto the Xpulse T the next morning, and even though this bike looks remarkably similar to the Xpulse, it feels dramatically different on the road. And that shouldn't come as a surprise, because if you look beyond the smaller 17-inch wheels and the conventionally positioned exhaust, the Xpulse T is quite a different animal under the skin.
In fact, the Xpulse 200T has a surprising amount in common with the Hero Xtreme 200R. It looks like an Xpulse and it has the Xpulse main chassis underneath, but the wheels and tires, they're from the Xtreme. The 200cc engine is carbureted, just like you'd find in the Xtreme. Even the swing arm has come off the Xtreme. But most of all, the front and rear suspension that has the same amount of travel as the Xtreme, with 130mm at the front and 110mm at the rear.
Unsurprisingly, the Xpulse T behaves very much like a road bike. It's supple, but it doesn't have anything close to the crater-eating ability of the standard Xpulse. At the same time, the front suspension has the same spindle offset as the Xpulse, which means that the steering geometry is a little more relaxed and the suspension feels a little softer as well. All this means that the Xpulse 200T is a good handler, but not quite as good as the Xtreme 200R, and from what we understand, Hero is trying to offer a more comfortable experience with this bike with a fully upright riding position. In case you were wondering, the T in the name stands for Tour, which is kind of contradicted by this bike's missing windscreen as well as its lack of serious highway performance. If the Xpulse T had some more suspension travel, it could have come across as a nice all-road version of the standard Xpulse, but as things stand, this is a street bike that's wearing the Xpulse's clothes and name.
Having ridden both these bikes now, we'll start the conclusion with the Xpulse 200T. I'm not so sure about the positioning of this motorcycle, but I guess it makes for a good option for someone who likes the design of the Xpulse and maybe the brand and the idea that comes with that brand, but they don't want such a tall motorcycle and maybe they just don't want to spend as much. But if you want the real deal, this is the one to have. The Xpulse is great fun out on the trails, and I think it'll make for a fantastic bike to go out and explore what lies outside your city. Is it a big upgrade over the original Impulse? Well, I think it needs more urgent performance to truly qualify as that, but I will tell you this, the Xpulse comes as a great successor to the Impulse because just like the original, it's fun, it's easy, and it's very well priced. In fact, I can't wait to spend more time with it.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a car that I have been itching to drive for the longest time. It's the BMW M2 Competition. And well, it's just a riot. What they basically did to achieve this M2 is take everything we love about a good M car and put it in a smaller, slightly more accessible package. But then because it's the competition version, they dialed it up just a little bit again. So what you have then is a relatively diminutive sports car with a 410 horsepower straight 6. 410! So now that I have it in docile mode, let me just tell you what it's like really quickly to live with in docile mode. Because let's be honest, if you live in India, chances are you'll spend a lot of time in your car doing mundane everyday things. You'd only really get to explore the limits every once in a while. And well, compared to a normal BMW luxury sedan, for instance, it is a little bit firmer. Of course, the steering is a little bit heavier, but that's only to be expected. And it's all within an acceptable limit. And yes, it's a little bit wider than you might expect at first, especially at the rear. But overall, it's still a very compact car, so you get used to driving it in traffic, for instance, in no time. It's got a pair of tiny back seats, which are best for occasional use only or for kids. And it's got a reasonably sized boot, which is currently filled with spare tire. And it's got these huge bucket seats that I absolutely love. These wing things by your shoulders give you really great support in the corners. And of course, they're electrically adjustable. That aside, the cabin is also quite luxurious, but you can tell that this is a slightly dated BMW in the bigger scheme of things because the design is of the last generation, the outgoing generation of BMWs. The trim is all black with only a few contrast stitched embellishments to liven it up. It's got the characteristic M-car thick rim steering wheel with big paddles peeking out from behind it, and customizable M switches to store your favorite settings. Yup, you can independently customize the engine ferocity, gearbox ferocity and steering weight, but not the suspension. And don't you just love the stubby, old school M gear selector which has been around since the E60 V10 powered M5? Now while it might not be as quiet as a 330i, I'm sure you'll agree it's pretty silent now that I have it in comfort and efficiency modes. Speaking of efficiency, if you aren't driving like a maniac, you can get a pretty decent cruising range out of the M2 Competition. It's even super composed, sitting at 3-digit speeds out on the highway. But what other practical considerations do you have to make? The ground clearance. This is a sports coupe, so it's not excellent, but it is still pretty decent. But the better news is that because this car has such a short wheelbase, you won't scrape it on speed bumps as much as you might think. All things you got to consider when buying one of these. But one of the biggest things you got to consider is the price, because while all the other M cars cost well north of 1 crore of rupees, this one costs less than 90 lakh rupees. And with 410 horsepower, that is a lot of bang for your buck. Right, sensible considerations out of the way, let's show you what this thing can do. Back up into Sport Plus, gearbox at its most ferocious setting. Let's dance. The 3-litre twin-turbo straight-six engine has been lifted straight out of an M3 and shoehorned into this tiny little car, with only a mild detune. And because the M2 is so petite, the power-to-weight ratio, about 250 horsepower per ton, is almost the same as its bigger sibling. Now that this car has a phenomenal amount of power for its size, there is no question. You can nurse it around the bottom end till about 3000 RPM, but once you fly past that, it just takes off. Strapped to our testing gear, the M2 demolished the 0 to 100 kph sprint in just 4.38 seconds and cracked 200 in just 14.46 seconds. Hardly what you'd call a junior sports car now, is it? And when you keep your foot in, it keeps building power all the way to the red line, which is nearly 7000 RPM. But here's where you start to see the competition part of this car's name come into play. If you should be so bold as to put it in Sport Plus mode, you better be committed. You cannot take half measures in Sport Plus mode with this car because it will goad you on and say, what are you made of? Push harder, push harder. It's straining at the leash and threatening to bite you back at every corner. You just have to pop a brave pill and go for it. The other thing about this car is the grip. Because it's so short and so wide, it's got a practically square stance on the road. But if you're willing to push hard enough, you'll find that someone even as ham-fisted as me can get the tail to step out, if just a little bit. With all that power in a, well, relatively manageable package, it's truly, genuinely a laugh-a-minute sports car that'll plaster a big, idiotic grin across your face. But it's not perfect. Things I'm not such a fan of, the steering. While it is really quick, well-weighted and precise, it just lacks that fingertip feel that you used to get from older BMWs, and I wish it had that. And then there's the sound. It is aggressive and it sounds good, but it's not great. And while we're on the subject of aggression, allow me to pull over to the side of the road because I have a bone to pick. The thing about sports cars or even sports coupes like this one is that they don't just have to drive well, they also have to look good to justify the price you're paying for them. And that's the problem I have with a lot of modern M cars. You see, they just don't look different enough from their regular diesel-powered counterparts. But not this one. You see, the 2 Series on which it's based is a very handsome looking car, but with the M2 Competition, they've dialed the aggression up to 11. I said before that it has a square footprint on the road, and I wasn't kidding. It looks so wide for a car that's ultimately quite small. The M addenda are all there. Aggressive intakes in the bumper, a gloss black grille, bulges in the bonnet, aero-efficient wing mirrors and 19-inch wheels. At the back there's the ultimate M signature, quad tailpipes, which poke out from a rather low-hanging transverse-mounted can. But no, what really does it for me are those hips, those flared rear wheel arches that signify a widened track and more serious performance intent. Subtle? Oh hell no. Now usually to bridge the gap between its mainstream models, for example a 330i, and its high-performance models, for example an M3, a luxury car maker would introduce a mid-performance model, which in this case should have been the M340i. But BMW didn't launch that car, it launched this M2 Competition instead. And I'm glad that's what they did because this is an altogether more focused performance car. In fact, the performance and driving pleasure it offers, I think, is right up there, very close to an M3 or an M4. Okay, at this price, there are rivals that do some things better than this car does. However, if you were in the market for an M3 or an M4, I would highly recommend considering one of these first.
We're in Gothenburg, Sweden, and Volvo, further to their announcement on capping speeds at 180 kilometers per hour, Volvo have just announced that they're going to have cameras looking inside at the driver in all of their new cars. Now that's essentially to decide whether the driver is distracted or maybe intoxicated, and then decide whether they need to intervene or not. Now it's a very thought-provoking move, one that's sure to create a lot of discussion. Well, let's get straight to discussions and meet some of the Volvo experts behind this new technology.
The intervention will come in essentially 3 stages, and to tell us more about how it would all work, we spoke with Trent Victor, Senior Technical Leader at Volvo Cars.
But here, what we're looking at is a 3-stage approach where you have a support phase where you have information warning and corrective behaviors or shielding of corrective behaviors, braking and steering in the first phase. And if that isn't enough, what happens is that the vehicle can be reducing the speed. So the vehicle can reduce speed, and the Volvo On Call can discuss with the driver what's going on. Some people have consequences based off of strokes or other medical conditions or drugs that are prescription drugs, but alcohol is the main contributor. And if that's not enough, we're able to give the vehicle the authority to stop the vehicle in the end.
Of course, with these systems, there is also the danger of over-reliance. And speaking with us was Malin Ekholm, Vice President of Volvo Safety Center, to help us understand this issue.
We've done a lot of research to work on understanding the human nature and the human brain and what the mechanisms are for you detaching from the task of driving and what the mechanisms are for keeping you in the driving and finding the right balance between support, but at the same time making sure that you understand that the car is actually not more capable than it is.
Celebrating 60 years of sharing its 3-point seatbelt patent, the company also announced sharing its safety research. Jan Ivarsen, Senior Technical Safety Advisor, shed some light.
The EVA initiative, it's a way of using what we have at Volvo Cars as in the front research for different situations in crashworthiness. And several of the documents has been presented a long time ago. And this is a way with the EVA to reintroduce them, but in a more summarized context. So you can see all of the documents and it's packaged in a certain way, so it's more easy to understand how the different research reports we have done over the years, how they fit together and how they could be structured and clustered together.
And now it's time for safety tips with Servo Futura G Plus from Indian Oil.